Lisa, I want to just a little clarification. The previous caller had such an interesting question, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around so many things to do with that. Mainly to do with feelings and thoughts, where I sometimes feel I don't understand which is first. So it makes sense sometimes that the thought is the first and creates the feeling. But it's so interesting what you were talking about, that sometimes the feelings just occur. They just come from nowhere. They just, show up. So just if you could clarify a little bit, talk a little bit more about that, because I often thought, just that made sense in my head, that
Yeah.
the thoughts are what we are being taught, kind of, and we pick it up along the way, and they kind of create those feelings later on.
Mm.
Do you know
Yeah,
what
and
I mean?
I don't think it's true that thoughts create all feelings. So if you take your dog, for example, like Khaleesi can't really think. She has some sort of thinking, but I presume it happens in imagination because she can't speak. So she's not thinking, like, oh, this is going to be really scary lately, but she's later, but she certainly has emotions. So it's instantaneous, So if there's a cat, or if she's jealous,
Yeah.
um, like, so she doesn't have so many emotions as us, but she certainly has some basic emotions that are happening prior to thought. So they're they're just appearing. So that's also happening in us. Like our body will have responses. It's like being trained to have responses to stuff, and it will happen so quickly. It'll be before thought. It'll be interpretation. So yeah.
So it's like the instinctive mind.
Mm,
It's it's like an instinct. Certain things just appear, like fear, or there's
mm.
different other emotions. But then also thoughts create emotions.
Yeah. So
Is that right?
then yeah, totally. So then you have like an imagination that you're going to get in trouble when you go to work tomorrow, and then fear arises in your body.
Yes.
So yeah, there's two different types. So there is the, like, is it called somatic when it's body experience? So the somatic response, where I don't think it is called somatic. I have to forget. So where you just see something instantly and your body is having a response, and then there is the thoughts that are creating emotions. And you can also do that. Like you can I've forgotten that word. When you give a job outside, you can also give it to the TV. The TV can also create it. So you can watching TV and joy can appear, and sadness and fear can appear. And that's kind of like an external thought. So it's like you're subcontracting it outwards. Like,
Oh
so
yeah.
these,
Oh yeah. Yes.
they like,
But it's just yeah, it's just so interesting that sometimes we have those reactions or emotions, even
mm,
to certain people, and you just don't know where it's coming from. I have, like really good vibes with somebody, and there's obviously no point overthinking it, but it's just interesting that our bodies don't lie, as you say. We get like
yeah.
positive emotions, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
We just feel good
Mm,
about something, or the opposite. That's
mm.
interesting.
Yeah, totally. And what's kind of the thoughts are kind of create. So I think that our body, like my feeling is that the body is programmed in a particular way, and then what you see externally will trigger particular feelings, and then also your thoughts will trigger feelings, but they're all kind of the same feelings and will be wired in the same way. We also do have empathy. So like if I'm around someone that's sad, then generally if I'm standing, I think within like 4 meters of them, then I'll begin to feel that sadness. I can
Yes.
also get it just from looking at somebody in the eyes through the internet as well.
Oh yeah.
um, but so that's a different story. We'll just put that aside for now. So I think that our bodies are programmed in certain ways, and that programming most probably comes in the first 5 years of life, and it's also like genetic. So you're genetically responding to things. So in rats, they did this experiment, which I'm so sorry that they did the experiment on rats, and I'm telling the story. I don't agree with experimenting on rats, but I read about it, so now I have this information. They traumatize the mother rat with something, say it's a pencil. Maybe I told you this last time, I forget. That they traumatize a rat, so with a pencil, and then the rat has babies, and then the babies haven't been traumatized by a pencil. They've never seen a pencil. They have no feeling of it. But then as soon as they see the pencil, they also have trauma to the pencil. So
Oh,
we
wow.
also like have the trauma of like what grew us, because our DNA is information. So
Yes.
it's going to be information about environment. So what really impressed me about Khaleesi, so Khaleesi is a street dog. She's 100% genetic street dog. I know that sounds weird, but when I say that, I mean that like her DNA is not a domesticated dog. So
Oh,
there's a
really?
difference. So her DNA is like 14,000 years old. It's prior to domestication of dogs. So domestication of dogs is selectively bred dogs, where she's not selectively bred. Her DNA has been breeding on the streets for 14,000 years. Do you understand the difference? A bit like the
Oh
original
my God,
tomato, like the
that's amazing.
I know, it is really amazing. They even think that dingoes in Australia came from her. So dingoes have evolved to be something else in Australia, but if you actually look at a dingo and Khaleesi, they look really similar. So so she is slightly more friendly than dingo, because the free ranging dogs in Thailand also live off a lot of scraps of food from people, whereas dingoes in Australia do, but they tend to be also more isolated. So they are a bit more friendly, Khaleesi's type. But
But she's
what
adapted, obviously.
she's what, sorry?
She adapted to being domesticated now.
Yeah, but genetically she's um, a non-domesticated dog. So domesticated dogs have genetically a predisposition, a way of being. So one thing that interested me with Khaleesi is that she never had to beg off tourists. So she, this really, I found this very interesting. So a lot of the free-ranging dogs in Thailand, they beg off tourists with plastic bags, and you'll often see them gathering around tourists with plastic bags. And Khaleesi never did this, because she for the first few months of her life or so, she was outside a phone shop away from tourists, and then she lived in the forest, so she didn't experience tourists with plastic bags. But Khaleesi is fascinated by tourists with plastic bags, especially white tourists with plastic bags.
Oh, wow.
It's really like interesting. Like as soon as
That
she
is
sees
interesting.
someone with a plastic bag, and that must be genetic in her DNA, because
Yeah.
obviously, like for many generations, like street dogs have been begging off white tourists that go to Koh Phangan Island, so Koh Phangan in Thailand, and they've passed. It's like genetically been passed on, because she didn't learn that.
Yeah. So yeah, it does make sense. It's like certain things that we have a predisposition to, or
Mm.
it's like a framework. The genetics are
Yeah,
like a framework we are born with.
yeah. And then you've got the
Um,
first 5 years of life which socialize you. So we don't ever see this, the genetics and the first 5 years of socialization. So we don't ever actually get to look outside of it and say, okay, this is what my personality structure will be like. We can do it to our dogs. We can watch their children and watch it get passed on, but we can't actually really do that with ourselves. So
yeah.
that's going to give you a predisposition. So if you have um, a trauma, if your family line has got a trauma, say with sexuality, then that will manifest in your life, and you will have
Yeah.
instinctual responses to it instantly.
Yeah.
Like and it's not something you'll be able to see in your life. You might not even be able to relate it in your life, because you might think, I didn't have any sexual. I'm just using this as an example. I'm not saying this happened to you.
Yes.
I don't have any
Yes.
like difficulties in this life with sexuality, but there is like a predisposition to it and a fear to it, and that is something that we're always going to be working on and evolving. Like that's
Yeah.
evolving the human species, and those responses happen instantaneously. When you have thoughts, you're triggering those responses. So your thoughts are triggering all your predisposition. So you've got a particular way of being, and then your thoughts are just triggering it. So rather than an external experience triggering it, your thoughts are triggering it. and your thoughts are seen as no different than the external experience.
And then would thoughts be um, appearing more of a certain kind, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Kind of in line with the way we are built
Yeah.
genetically.
And the way that we were socialized in the first 5 years of life, which will also, because we're brought up by family members most of the time, your socialization will be very similar to your genetic predisposition, because your parents will be socializing you, which will also have the predisposition to your particular genetics. So yeah, so totally. So you will all, so I noticed that you know, I have similar traumas, responses to my parents and to, you know, my siblings. So I notice that there is that we have as a family a story.
Yes.
I don't know if they necessarily notice it, but I can see that we have similar responses and similar ways of being.
That's I noticed that in my family too.
Yeah.
So it's all connected. So the
Yeah.
way you are built genetically and the first, you know,
so
few years in
impersonal,
conditioning,
yeah.
it predisposes us to have a certain way of thinking.
And a certain
and
life,
then,
yeah.
Although the thoughts come from kind of nowhere, but we do.
They're in a pattern, yeah.
Yes, we do attract a certain type of thinking.
And a certain way of life. Your thoughts will then manifest your particular life. So if you have a predisposition towards fear of failure, then you will have a life that reflects that. You will be afraid of doing things because of fear of failure. So your life will reflect back your particular story.
That's amazing, yeah.
Like that's when like law of attraction comes in, where they say, you know, you attract what you think. It's kind of so impersonal though. And then this is where the freedom is, because it's, you see that you aren't the information that's playing out. The character is information which is playing out. It's a program playing out that's absolutely impersonal, and it's been playing out for many generations, and it's evolving as it interacts. You are that which is watching it.
That is just mind-blowing, but it makes sense. Yeah. There's one instance in my life, and I just very briefly tell you about it, because this is as close as I can describe to just feeling the total oneness. And it happened spontaneously, and it lasted several hours, and it kind of faded away. I'm not sure why at that moment anyway, but what I can say is it felt like there was no thought whatsoever. Everything was blended together, and I was enjoying just being in the garden. I was outside, and it was during work actually. It's funny, but when the thoughts started appearing, and kind of, it's as if, you know, little puzzles falling down and just trying to make their way again as some sort of like a veil. I don't know how to describe it. It felt like they are dissecting the reality. They are separating it.
Totally.
This is what it felt like, and I don't even want to say anything more about it, because it just doesn't seem accurate. But it was just that feeling where the oneness was being separated by those kind of, I don't know, programs, or just the thoughts kind of trying to force themselves again on top of me, kind of. I don't know how to describe it. So
it's not inherent. It's not that thoughts are inherently the problem, but what happens is there becomes an attachment and aversion to the thought, and then that in itself creates the separation, and then exacerbates the thinking process. So it kind of,
because we're trying to get away from it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So it's not. So thinking is like, it's something that we all have to do in order to survive. Otherwise, we'd be put into mental institute. Like, we need to be able to think. We need to be able to comprehend certain things. So in and of itself, it's really not a problem. But then there becomes the thinking creates an uncomfortable feeling, or like tells a particular story. Then there's identification, and then the seeking starts, and then the motors get going of that separation. So in you, it was like a dissecting, and that dissecting made a kind of like a contraction, and then slowly the seeking came back in.
it came back in, yes. And it showed me that um, it's like a filter with which we see the world, you know, and it
Mm.
is necessary, as you say, because you need to function.
Mm.
So we all have that, but it's just interesting that it's
Yeah.
just
And it's just a filter. Like you can put on a different filter in a different story and the world will look completely different. Like we're just all hypnotized into our current society's storytelling.
and we
Like
can get
so,
so
so, so
lost in this as
yeah.
well.
So what the life could be really different. Like I didn't listen to the talk, but I was just doing some research earlier, and it was a talk about bio fabrication. So it was talking about being able to grow our clothes and being able to grow our materials, you know, like from fungi, from bacteria, from algae. And
Okay.
I just think this notion is so cool that we can grow our living environment. And like at the moment, like the way in which we look at living environment and the way that we look at our products, it's our particular way of looking at it. Like we have a narrative around our homes, around our things, around our objects. And our narrative would be so completely different if we were constantly growing our environment. Like it would be such we'd be so much more integrated with our environment in a way if we're growing our environment constantly, if we're growing our house, if we're growing our clothes. Like it would be a different experience of what things are. Like our
Yeah.
experience at the
If only,
moment.
yeah, but it's like, can we change the patterns of thought quickly enough? That's the question, I suppose.
No. We can change it quickly and rapidly in one way. If you look at it from bird's eye perspective, you can, because if we see like the last 200 or 300 years,
If you see them for what
humans,
they are, I suppose, yeah.
but also humans can evolve quickly. So we do have this, like, if you think 100 years ago, the idea of computers and what we're doing now, it would seem impossible for that society to do it. And you can also see it through the generations. Like the younger generations are so much better at computers. So we can evolve quickly if you look at it from a bird's eye perspective. But if we look at it from our own personal experience, we can't really evolve our bodies personally very quickly. But generations, we can evolve quite quickly. And that is quite quick in terms of the life of this universe.
Absolutely. It's always worth investigating anyway, because going around in circles, sometimes, you know, when you suffer enough, that kind of comes up that, you know, maybe
Yeah,
there's a little bit of a different pathway to
yeah,
explore. But you know, there's no saying. Everybody's just so different, and there's individual
yeah,
pathway of how people kind of
yeah,
get to notice these things in their lives. Yeah.
yeah,
But it's funny, yeah. This certain patterns of thought. My family, I have two brothers, and we're so, yeah. This is funny how we think of certain things similar way, and similar things happening in our
yeah,
lives. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder why. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah,
Great
with
talking to
pleasure.
you.
And how is your health? Are you feeling a lot? I know I've spoken to you since, but is it improving your health?
It's improving. Yes, I was able after nearly 2 years to go and visit my family now,
Oh, nice.
because first of all, you know, it's a bit easier to travel, and also my health is improving, so I was able to get on the plane and
Oh,
see my
cool.
folks. So
Oh,
that's
great.
helpful.
Oh, nice. I'm happy to
So
hear
I
that.
am improving. I still, you know, need a bit of time, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's all going well. Thank you so much.
yeah, nice. Oh, lovely to speak with you again.
Lovely to talk to you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for the question.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.